right, it's Pipes Drums, and we're back with John Phillips. He is Judge Administrator with Drum Corps International. And thanks again, John, for taking the time with us today.
It's great to be here, Andrew. I'm enjoying this and learning a lot about your world of music as well. So this is fantastic.
That's great. So we talked in the first part about just kind of how DCI works, the evolution of the organization, things like that. I thought maybe we could get into sort of how the events themselves work, and specifically, why don't we start off with judging? So, how are drum corps at DCI competitions? How are they assessed? How does the judging work?
It's a fairly complex yet straightforward construct. So I'll try to boil it down to the nitty gritty here for the audience so they can follow along. But a typical drum corps contest will have 8 judges who provide scores, and we also have a chief judge who oversees the entire event. There are 3 main parts of the assessment or the evaluation: the marching, the brass, and the percussion. So it's kind of basically those 3 things. Now, in addition, the marching part involves an auxiliary unit, which is known as a color guard, and they receive their own evaluation along with those other elements that I mentioned. And what happens is the judges will begin by assessing the various parts of each of those areas, the marching, the brass, and the percussion, in very close proximity. In fact, we have judges right down on the field with the performers in close proximity. The visual judge will be looking at things like posture and the way the feet are moving, and if they're in step, and if they're spaced appropriately, and all of those details that go into the marching side of things. And it's not only marching. I really do want to mention, if any of your listeners are interested, they can go to dci.org and they can see some images of the corps, and there's a little video on there where you go to the About section. It'll show them some of the choreographic responsibilities that performers do. It's not just marching in blocks and doing counter marches and things like we would do in a parade. And then coming back to the to the field judges, we have a brass judge who's listening very intently to the individual tone of each brass musician, looking at their technical aspects, listening for the way they phrase together, do they express the music together. And then subsequently, we have a percussion judge who looks again at their rudimental control and their precision, their timing, and also their phrasing, just like they would with the brass. So all of that is encompassed by 3 judges who are down on the field. And then there are some other judges in the press box area. I mean, you mentioned in the first segment about the stadiums. Well, they're big stadiums, and there's plenty of rooms in these press boxes to have a number of judges up there. So we have 3, and they'll be looking and listening to the ensemble of the group. So the same thing for the visual judge. They're looking at the bigger picture of how precise the performers are, and the have an ensemble music judge who's listening to how the drums and the brass fit together. We've introduced over the past 5 years or so, electronic sounds and amplification of instruments. So all of that's made a big difference. It's not only the sound of the brass, but there's electronic things like synthesizers, and all that stuff gets mixed together in the rehearsal, and the performers go out there, and then the judge makes an assessment of that balance and blend and all of those kinds of things. And then I mentioned the color guard. So in traditional parades, we'd have the national colors, the flags of the different countries or the communities or the provincial flags. They'd be marching in front carrying a banner. That was the extent of color guards in the parade mode back in the day. But a color guard today in drum corps, it's more like a dance ensemble, or very acrobatic and very choreographic. So that color guard has somebody who has a real specialized knowledge of not only the dancing side of things, but they don't just hold the flag straight up and down. They're twirling these things and throwing them back and forth to each other. They have rifles and sabers and other kinds of implements that they will do. So it's a really complex thing. So there's 6 of the 8 judges. And then there are two judges who look at the overall picture and they respond to what we call the effect of the performance. And that's kind of the entertainment value of the show. It's the overall production and how effective it is. And that includes the pacing of the show. If you're telling a story, how effective you are in communicating that narrative and that story. So all of that stuff goes into the mix with these judges. And typically each one of them has 10 points. So if we take 8 judges with 10 points, that only adds up to 80. But those last two that I mentioned, the effect judges, they actually get double the points. So there's more value to the big picture, and that comes out to the score out of 100.
That's really interesting. And so all 8 scores. You don't do you throw out the highs and lows when it comes to that kind of a the overall assessment of all the bands?
Over the years, there's been talk of that, but no, it's those 8 judges make that determination in that given event, and
Okay.
every point counts. So, when I first started judging, I won't say how long ago it was, but I've been around DCI for a while. It was where the judges would be looking for errors. They'd be looking for and listening for the mistakes. And in fact, we had a clipboard and we had a little sheet and we would put down a little mark
Hmm.
every time we heard something that wasn't together or that was out of tune or somebody missed a note, that kind of thing. Um, Over time, it's evolved to what we call we're rewarding achievement. And so rather than, kind of knocking points off, it's all about rewarding. And there's a grid, there's a rubric that the judges work from, and there are identifying criteria. So if you're doing this really well, you're going to be in this range. And if you're doing here and not quite so well, you'll be in a different range. And that's how the judges come up with the score. And at the same time, when they're listening and watching the performance, they're making a voice recording to provide the performers and their instructors with some immediate feedback on what they're hearing and seeing. And so that all goes into the mix. And the commentary, of course, should connect to what the scoring range is.
That's really interesting and topical for the pipe band world because, you know, well, we struggled forever with negative judging, where, one mistake and you're out kind of thing. It's gotten better, but there's still a lot of that, because judges are looking or expecting, exactness all the time. So it's easy. It can be easy for a judge if something is glaringly wrong. Well, there's my decision. It's made for me.
Right.
It's really interesting. So okay, so DCI judging, it's spoken word through it's recorded, or is it also written?
It's recorded. We used to have even when we were recording, we used to have sheets, and on the sheet you would put the score and write the comments. But now everything goes into an electronic recording system and scoring system that's housed in the cloud. So it's called Competition Suite. And a lot of groups use it, not only Drum Corps International, but a lot of the marching band world uses it, and other pageantry events across the country and around the world are using Competition Suite. And and there are similar products, but it's a really easy thing to use. And the
Hmm.
commentary is recorded. And the best part of that is that as soon as the group has finished their performance, the instructors can get their earbuds out, put them in, and go to the app and hear what the judge had to say about how the performance went. They
Wow.
won't see their score right away. They won't see their score. And then at the end of the event, once all the scores are in, there's a button that the chief tabulator hits, and that releases the scores, and the competitors can see how they fared against the others in their various captions, and then the overall thing. So
Hmm.
yeah, once the scores are announced in the stadium, it's pretty immediate in terms of being able to see the breakdown of how things went that night.
That's amazing. Where the pipe band world is still all written out and then, tabulated by hand, and hopefully it's correct. And 2 hours later, there's going to be a result.
Yeah.
So the comments for DCI are in context with what's being played. That is, like, if you have a comment, you can actually hear, the exact point of the performance where it is. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. It's okay. Let's, hopefully we can look into competition suite and see if it can apply to the pipe band world. Sounds like it can. Now, just a quick question. A lot of your events are outdoors. So what happens if it rains and the tech on the technology, or are the events canceled, or just how does it work?
Yeah, it depends on how severe the rain is. It's more about the lightning, it's more about the wind or lightning or tornadoes, things that are severe weather situations. That would be a cause for the event to be canceled. Often there are rain delays, uh, but if it's a deluge and there's a safety issue, because the groups are not marching at a slow tempo, they're moving quickly. They're moving at 160 plus beats per minute. They're not just marching forward, they're marching backwards, blind moves, and all kinds of highly designed choreographic movement. And so, if it's too slippery, there's several conditions under which, if it's deemed to be unsafe for the performers, there's not going to be an event. And hopefully, the person who's putting on the event, if it's not DCI, because sometimes these events are run by local community groups as a fundraiser for their community. They'll bring this event, or schools will do it, and it'll generate a lot of revenue for their school because they sell lots of tickets and lots of hot dogs at the concession stands and that sort of thing. But if
Sure.
it gets canceled, hopefully they got a good rain policy and they'll get insurance to cover that.
Right. But the if it rains on your headset or whatever the computer technology that you're using, is that ever a concern of it fritzing out and
Uh,
the
it hasn't been. I mean, they'll have ponchos on or an umbrella or whatever. The problem with the umbrella, of course, if the judges are sitting in the stands and there's people behind them, they don't like that. But in the bigger venues, it's never a problem because you're inside a press box. So for a judge, it's not a problem. It's uncomfortable for the performers and the audience, but
I
uh,
see.
the judges in most places lead a charmed life. They're not outside. Now that decades ago, Andrew, that wasn't the case, right? Until it's evolved to where we're at today. But most of the events held today are held where, you'd be surprised in the United States at how many schools have really good stadiums for their football team, and they have press boxes, so you can be inside and protected. So those field judges that I mentioned, though, that's the assignment you don't want to have when it's raining, because you got to
Mm,
be standing down there on the field with the performers, and if they're going to go out there and perform, you're going to go out there and judge.
yeah. Sounds like they're the closest example, closest to the tape band world where they're out in the field.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about new music, the content that drum corps perform. Is new music, can they play anything, or are they kind of restricted more to, coincidentally, John Phillips Sousa music, or
Sure.
forgive my lack of knowledge here, but how does that work?
Yeah, so most of the groups will perform what I call hybridized music. They'll perform. I mean, some will perform original music that their arranger has crafted, has created, or what might be hybridized because of copyright restrictions or limitations. So, for instance, it's difficult to do like a John Williams or a Disney show because a lot of these things are recorded. A lot of these events are recorded and streamed, and because of the copyright laws, you just can't do that. There were decades that everybody did, and there was no royalties paid to the original composers and arrangers and that sort of thing. So it's become a lot more restrictive that way. There's certain elements you can do up to a certain amount of time and extrapolate some music. I call them mashups. So a lot of the corps will pick up 30 seconds of this thing and 20 seconds of that, and throw it all together and create these arrangements. But as far as music, anything goes. I mean, you can do anything. You could do a Cirque du Soleil, and if you can get the rights, you can perform originally. You want to do a Michael Jackson show, you can get the rights, you can do it.
Hmm.
It's all possible. Um, it's uh, it's very creative. I think that's one of the things that's happened is because of this whole copyright thing is it's put a lot of emphasis on the creative design team to craft music that will fit within the guidelines and not be too expensive to get the rights for, and that still has entertainment value for your audience.
It's, yeah, it's fascinating because the same sort of situation has happened in the pipe band world, at least on the creative side of things, where a lot of original material comes out. Now, the copyright side of things completely ignored in the pipe band world. It's just it's not even a factor. So it's interesting to hear how DCI has dealt with it. Now,
Yeah.
okay, conflict of interest with adjudicators. Do you have strict rules that they can't be involved with, say a musical instrument manufacturer or aligned with a specific band?
So yeah, there's two levels of that conflict of interest. I'll start with the second one you referred to is you cannot have any alliance or instructional experience with one of the performing groups. So you can't basically judge a group that you have had some instructional alliance with, and or nor one that you've had experience with in the past 2 or 3 years. So if somebody taught for a while and then they got into judging, we would probably keep them away from that group, meaning they could judge other events, but just wouldn't be judging the one that their group, former group was in for several years. And yeah, I think that's really the number one conflict that affiliation issue that we face. And then as far as the instrument manufacturers, and I mean, in our world, we've got uniforms. In the pipe band world, it's a pretty much standard. There's a tartan, and uh, what the uniform has kind of a consistent look from group to group, except for just the color and scheme and the tartan. But in the drum corps world, that's part of their brand, right? Like a group like the Casper Troopers, they've got this kind of look to them, and there are different uniform companies who manufacture these things. So some people might have an affiliation with the instruments, they might have affiliation with uniforms, they might have affiliation with some of the other products that are out there, the brass, percussion, electronic instruments. They might be what we call representatives. And all of the main instrument manufacturers, Conn-Selmer, Yamaha, in the drum world, you've got Pearl and Ludwig and um, Remo and all of these different drum manufacturers. A lot of them will have an educational team. And some of my judges are representatives of those teams. If I was ever brought to an awareness that somebody had said, "Well, you would do better if you played this instrument or use these sticks or use this kind of a drum head or use that kind of a mouthpiece," that judge would be gone. But I've been doing this now for 20 years in my role as judge administrator, and we've had no issue with conflict of interest from a representative standpoint, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, is it closely monitored? I mean, do you look at results and if you see someone kind of giving the boost to a manufacturer they might be connected with as a representative, I'm not sure. Uh, do you monitor that?
Uh, I'm aware of it. I've never really done a statistical analysis to see. We have 130 judges, right, to
Hmm.
cover 130 events, and we use 8 at each one. So, um, it would, if you're on a panel of 8 judges, you would have to really be obvious if you were going to be in favor of the group that played that kind of instrument or that wore that brand of uniform or use that kind of a rifle that you might be a representative for. So, yeah, it's really isn't an issue, and I hope I'm not sounding too naive here, but I can tell you this is such a highly charged competitive community. If it was an issue, somebody would have brought it to my attention by now.
Right. So on that note, are participants, competitors, members, are they did do they speak freely on, let's say, social media about the events or the judging, or is there what's the atmosphere like with DCI? Or or do they tend to be very cautious with their comments?
Yeah, I think we've reached a point in our in this activity in drum corps that's really it's a healthy type of competition. They have a lot of respect for their colleagues and their peers, and so they tend to accept the results. Now, are they always pleased or are they always accept it uh, without any question? I wouldn't say that. And they always they have my cell number, so. Sometimes I hear after certain contests about Judge X, Y, or Z who might have scored them lower, or they said that something that didn't make sense, or whatever. But they're both the judges and the competitors have a code of conduct, and they are bound to abide by that. So the Corps staffs are pretty savvy that if they go on public media, social media, and say something negative about this whole thing, they could potentially lose their position or certainly be censored for the rest of the season, not allowed to come to the events or anything like that.
Hmm, interesting. So, okay, why don't we could talk forever, but let's just wind this down. It's just really fascinating. Uh, how about we end on this? Given what you know about the pipe band world, what advice might you have for us?
Well, I'm fortunate that I get to travel around the world, and I've been to far corners of South Asia and Asia and Europe and South America, Central America to do what I do as an adjudicator and clinician for bands and marching bands. And I tell all of these various cultural groups that I see, because they do kind of embed their own culture into their interpretation of what marching band and drum corps and the DCI world is. They see videos, right? So they try to be like that. And I say, no, 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 no. You need to be more true to yourself. And that's what I would say to the pipe band community is honor the tradition that you have, because I think pipe bands have such a long-standing tradition. And as I said, it's evident in just the appearance. I mean, you see a band coming down the street, it's a pipe band. You can tell by the sound and by the look and by the sound of those drums, the bass drum. I mean, that just kind of kicks the whole thing off. So those traditions are really important, and I know that they're probably embedded in the evaluation system. So you want to take that to the highest level. But I also think we're at a time in the development of this whole pageantry and marching music world where we've got some technology that can actually help us to be even more entertaining and more pleasing to the public, and perhaps even to challenge the performers to go a little bit beyond what they've done in the past. So if there's a way to help you tune things better, or help get the free flow of the air through the instrument, or if the technology in the drum manufacturing is better, it's going to give it better life and durability. Maybe that's worth having a look at if you can afford it. I think that the thing about the pipe band world for me is it's got this sonic environment. There's just this great sound, and going back in history, whether it's hearing that piper come over the hill and try to scare the other troop that's out on the field of battle, or to parade some royalty through the streets of a town and honor somebody, a hero. I think those are all traditions and things that you want to hold on to and continue to get the best you can be in your own musical world. And the last thing I would say is, um, if you could embrace some of the things that we've talked about today, as far as the judging technology, not the way that we judge, because we're judging different things, but if it's going to make it easier for the judges to record their comments and to get their scores down, and maybe make some adjustments instead of worrying about weathering the elements outdoors with papers flying around and getting wet and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, maybe that's something to have a look at as well. And I'd be more than happy, Andrew, to meet with any committee that's looking into that and share what we have and tell them how to do it.
Well, it's fantastic. It's a fabulous offer, and I'm sure, an association is going to be keen to take you up on that. It's amazing to us that, we've known about DCI for so long, and, don't know why we didn't do this 20 years ago or more, because you've been a great help, just enlightening to bring us, the information on how Drum Corps International works. And we really appreciate it, John. And thanks once again for taking the time to share with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Get one last plug in. I think if anybody else is interested about learning more about Drum Corps International, just dci.org, and you'll learn about the 50th anniversary tour and learn a little bit more about Drum Corps International.
Fantastic. Thanks again, John.
My best to you.